My daughter said that I was no longer part of her life and that she owed me nothing. You are not important. So, when she came asking for money after her wedding, I told her to let her new family pay for it. For as long as I can remember, my life has revolved around my daughter. Raising her alone was not easy, but I never complained. It was necessary to ensure that she had everything she needed. From the moment I held her in my arms, I knew that my entire world would shrink down to her well-being, her happiness and her success. I worked tirelessly, taking extra shifts whenever necessary, sacrificing my own pleasures without hesitation, all with one goal, to give Ruby a life without hardships. But it wasn't just financial security that drove me to be the father I was. It was also the responsibility of raising her with values, with gratitude, with the understanding that everything she had did not come from nowhere, but from the relentless efforts of a father who gave her everything. Throughout her childhood and teenage years, I was her biggest supporter. I was the one who attended every school event, who celebrated each of her victories, no matter how small, and who picked up the pieces when things didn't go her way. I always believed our relationship was strong, that the bond we had built over the years was unbreakable. But I was wrong. At some point, without me even noticing, everything I had built began to crumble. It all started when Ruby met Andrew, a young man who, from the moment he entered her life, marked day before and after in her attitude. At first, I thought it was just the excitement of a new relationship. It's normal that when someone falls in love, their world narrows a little and their attention shifts toward the person they want to spend their time with. I wasn't worried, but I noticed small changes. She no longer called as often. Her visits became less frequent. Our conversations grew more superficial. I tried not to overthink it, convincing myself that it was just a phase. But as time passed, the signs became too obvious to ignore. The first time I truly felt pushed aside was on her birthday. We had always had a tradition of having dinner together that day. But this time, when I asked about her plans, she simply told me she would be busy. No invitation. No explanation. Later, I found out through social media that she had celebrated with Andrew's family, with her friends, with everyone except me. I felt a tight knot in my chest, but I decided not to make a scene. I justified her behavior, thinking maybe she didn't want Andrew to feel like he had to share her. Maybe it was just a matter of adjustment. But time only confirmed what I already knew deep down. With each passing week, Ruby drifted further and further away from me. She became someone almost unrecognizable, a woman who, despite being raised with love and sacrifice, acted as if I didn't exist. I watched her disregard my efforts, behave as if everything I had given her meant nothing, as if being her father was nothing more than a footnote in her story. And then, when she announced her engagement to Andrew, I felt a mix of emotions. A part of me was happy for her, she had always dreamed of this moment. But another part. The deepest part of me couldn't ignore the feeling that I no longer had a place in her life. Still, I forced myself to think positively. Maybe this would be a new beginning for us, an opportunity to rebuild what seemed to have been lost. But the months leading up to the wedding only reinforced my fears. I wasn't included in almost anything. Every time I tried to get involved, I was met with curt responses from Ruby or vague excuses about how everything was already under control. No one consulted me about the preparations. No one asked for my opinion on anything. And when I asked if I could help with something, Andrew, with his condescending tone, told me he didn't want to bother me with such tedious details. I stayed quiet, swallowing the lump in my throat, trying to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe this was normal. But it wasn't. When the wedding day finally arrived, I went with my heart in my hands, hoping that despite everything, this moment would still be special. I dressed carefully, choosing a suit I had picked out weeks in advance, wanting to be presentable for the occasion, only to face the greatest humiliation of my life. When I arrived at the Grand Oak Wedding Hall, the staff at the entrance looked at me with confusion. They checked the guest list, and after a few seconds of awkward silence, they told me my name wasn't there. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I tried to explain. I tried calling Ruby, but she didn't answer. And then Andrew appeared, with his fake smile and syrupy voice, looking at me as if I were a nuisance he needed to get rid of. With a sickening calmness, he said that he and Ruby had decided it would be best if I didn't attend. "We don't want any drama." Those were his exact words. As if my presence at my own daughter's wedding would somehow ruin their day. At that moment, I understood everything. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. My daughter had made a conscious decision to erase me from this important day. I stood there at the entrance, feeling like a stranger, an outsider in the life of the person I had given everything for. An indescribable emptiness washed over me, a wound I knew would never fully heal. I turned around and walked away, my dignity shattered, but with the certainty that something had changed forever. Days passed before Ruby finally bothered to call me. There was no remorse in her voice. She said she hoped I would respect her decision and that we could talk about it soon. There was no apology. There was no empathy. Just a demand disguised as courtesy. That was the moment I knew I had a decision to make. I had spent my whole life giving her everything, expecting nothing in return except for her love and respect. And now that she had shown me she had neither, it was my turn to decide what to do with what little remained between us. Update 1. The silence weeks passed after the wedding. After that day, when I stood outside the wedding hall, feeling invisible, irrelevant, completely removed from my own daughter's life. In that time, I made no effort to reach out. I didn't try to reopen any channels of communication. In the past, I would have rushed to call her, to ask what I had done wrong, to try to fix whatever the problem was, even if I didn't know what it was. But this time was different. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't seek explanations. I simply disappeared from her life the same way she had decided to erase me from hers. At first, the silence was heavy. Every day, every hour, every minute without hearing from her felt like a reminder of how little I had meant to her. I couldn't help but wonder, would she ever miss me? Would she ever look back and feel even the slightest regret for what she had done? But as time passed, the weight grew lighter. I stopped looking at my phone, waiting for a message. I stopped checking social media for clues about her new life. And little by little, I found unexpected peace in the absence of her voice. Then out of nowhere, the silence broke. The call came on an ordinary day, a day when I expected nothing from her. I glanced at my phone, and her name lit up the screen like a ghost from the past. I won't lie. For a second, my heart raced. For a moment, a part of me thought, maybe, just maybe, this call would bring an apology. Maybe a tiny sign of remorse. Maybe even a chance to rebuild what had been broken. But I was wrong. As soon as I answered, her tone was the same as always. As if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't humiliated me weeks ago. As if everything was fine between us. She greeted me with the same casualness she always used when she wanted something. And without wasting much time on formalities, she got straight to the point. She needed money. Apparently, the wedding had been far more expensive than planned. Andrew, with his extravagant tastes and dream wedding fantasies, had spent way more than they had budgeted for. And now, despite the cash gifts from their guests, it wasn't enough to cover their honeymoon at Hawaiian Paradise Resort. They had come up short. And without hesitation, Ruby had decided to turn to me to fill that financial gap. As she spoke, explaining her situation with an almost insulting casualness, I couldn't help but wonder, how is it possible that she felt no shame? How could she call and ask me for money after what she had done? How could she even imagine that after excluding me from her wedding, she would have the audacity to ask me to finance her happiness with the man who had been complicit in her disregard for me? I listened to her entire speech without interrupting, without saying a word. I let her talk, let her try to convince me with that voice that had once softened my heart. But now all it did was fill me with indifference. And when she finished, when she finally stopped talking and waited for my response, I gave her the only answer she deserved. A hard no. I answered her with a calmness that even surprised me. No. Just as she had chosen to remove me from her wedding, I was now choosing to remove myself from her list of solutions. If she wanted a life without me, then she would have to live with the consequences of that decision. There was silence, a long, heavy, uncomfortable silence. And then her tone changed. Gone was the fake kindness. Now there was irritation. Disbelief, as if she truly could not comprehend that her own father would dare to say no to her. You should be grateful I'm even calling you, she said, her voice laced with arrogance, making my stomach turn. In another time, in another context, those words might have hurt me. They might have made me doubt myself, made me feel guilty. But in that moment, at that exact instant, all I felt was a dark, profound satisfaction. For the first time, I was truly seeing my daughter for who she was, an entitled woman who saw her father as nothing more than an ATM, an inexhaustible resource she could tap into whenever she needed, without ever giving anything in return. I hung up without another word. Then I blocked her number. Minutes later, my phone vibrated again. A message from Andrew. You're a terrible father. You ruined the start of our marriage. I read his words and for the first time in a long time I smiled, because in that moment I knew I had made the right decision. And the best part? This was just the beginning. Update 2, the silence that spoke volumes. Time passed and the silence between us settled in again. But this time it carried more weight. More meaning. It wasn't the awkward silence that comes with the hope of reconciliation. It was the silence that came with the certainty that the distance between us had become irreparable. After that last phone call, after my firm refusal and Andrew's venomous message, I never heard from Ruby again. She made no further attempts to contact me, no attempts to convince me. And in some way, that confirmed what I had already suspected. She never called for any reason other than money. She never wanted to mend our relationship. There had never been even the slightest trace of genuine remorse. She only needed me when life backed her into a corner. But the universe has a funny way of settling scores. And it didn't take long before I started hearing about what was happening in her life. The information came from different sources, distant relatives, mutual acquaintances, snippets of overheard conversations. And of course, social media. That curated showcase where people desperately try to make their lives look better than they really are. The honeymoon that Andrew had always dreamed of turned out to be a watered-down version of what he had planned. Instead of the luxurious Hawaiian Paradise Resort with breathtaking ocean views, the one he had bragged about to his friends, they had to settle for Sunset Inn, a far less exclusive destination. In the photos they posted, they tried to fake happiness. But there was something off about the way they smiled. The way their friends' comments were filled with phrases like, "What matters is love," the kind of things people say when they know things aren't as perfect as they seem. But the honeymoon was just the beginning of their downfall. Reality hit them hard upon their return. The wedding had been an enormous financial burden. And now, with their bank accounts emptier than expected, tensions started to rise. I soon found out that Ruby and Andrew had bought a house before the wedding, a home that Andrew had picked out with the confidence that if financial trouble ever arose, I would be there to help. I could picture the conversation they must have had at the time. "Don't worry," he must have told her. "Your dad loves you too much to let you struggle." And Ruby, trusting, so sure he was right, had agreed. But now, without my financial backing, Without my wallet to solve their problems, the bills started piling up. Payments started falling behind. And stress did what it always does in these situations: it revealed people's true colors. Andrew, who had played the role of the loving husband so well, started showing signs of impatience. I knew because his once flashy social media, which had been filled with posts about their perfect life, became a barren wasteland. No more pictures of expensive dinners, no more shopping sprees, no more weekend getaways. Everything became duller, more mundane. And then the second call came, but this time it wasn't from Ruby. It was from Aunt Linda, someone who had never been entirely on my side, but had also never fully distanced herself from me the way Ruby had. Her tone on the other end of the line was a mix of caution and urgency. "Maggie," she said, dragging out my name with a hesitant sigh. "I don't want to meddle where I'm not wanted, but I heard that Ruby is having trouble with the house and, well, I thought maybe you'd want to talk to her." I stayed silent for a moment, letting her words settle. I knew exactly what she was doing, testing the waters, seeing if I still had any weakness left for my daughter, seeing if there was still a part of me willing to drop everything and run to fix her life. So with absolute calm, I responded with the exact words they had thrown at me at the wedding hall. "I don't want any drama." There was silence on the other end. Then a heavy sigh. Aunt Linda didn't argue. She didn't try to convince me. She didn't give me a speech about the importance of family. Maybe because deep down, she knew I was right. The days passed and, even though I had no direct contact with Ruby, bits and pieces of her life still found their way to me. A mutual acquaintance told me that Andrew was growing resentful. He blamed Ruby for not planning better financially. He was colder with her, less affectionate. Someone else mentioned that Andrew had even considered moving back in with his parents for a while, something that, for someone like him, must have felt like a humiliating defeat. Meanwhile, I was living my life with a peace I hadn't experienced in years. I focused on myself. I enjoyed my independence. I allowed myself the luxuries I had denied myself for so long because I had been too busy making sure Ruby had everything she needed. Until the final blow came. It happened during a conversation with an old friend. Someone who, by sheer coincidence, had run into Andrew at a social event. She told me Andrew looked different. More withdrawn. And in the middle of a conversation with other men, Andrew had bitterly muttered a sentence that confirmed what I already knew. "Without her father, Ruby is nothing." Time passed, and the cracks in their so-called perfect life deepened. The silence between us wasn't just empty, it was deafening. Ruby never tried to contact me again, and Andrew's passive-aggressive messages stopped. But the truth always finds a way to surface. Through whispers from acquaintances and the occasional social media update, I pieced together the reality of their downfall. Andrew no longer flaunted expensive gifts or weekend getaways. The house they had bought so eagerly had become a financial nightmare. Without my financial support, bills piled up, overdue payments stacked one on top of the other, and stress took its toll. Andrew, who once played the devoted husband, began to pull away. A mutual acquaintance told me he was less patient with Ruby, colder in public, his sarcastic remarks revealing growing resentment. He blamed her for not giving him the life he expected, for failing his plan. He had assumed someone would step in to save them. That someone had always been me, but not this time. The breaking point. Then the real collapse began. One day in a fit of frustration, Andrew left. It wasn't an official divorce. No legal papers, no final goodbye. He simply left. At first, he framed it as taking space or needing time to think, but everyone knew what it really meant. Soon, word spread that he no longer stayed at their home, the one they had built together, that he was going out more, seen with other women, women who could offer him the luxury he craved. And Ruby, my daughter, the girl who once held my hand and looked up to me with admiration, was now just a woman left alone in an empty house, drowning in debts she couldn't pay, weighed down by a life she was never truly prepared for. The final confirmation. I knew their fantasy had fully crumbled when I received a message. Not from Ruby. Not from Andrew. But from Aunt Linda. The same aunt who had once tried to convince me to help her. This time, her tone was different. No hesitation. No persuasion. Just a blunt statement. "Ruby isn't doing well. I don't know if you care or not, but I felt you should know." I read the message once. Twice. 3 times. And then I waited to feel something. The impulse to call. The urge to ask. The instinct to fix things. But I felt nothing. Update 4. The aftermath. Time passed as it always does, without pausing for anyone. The rumors about Ruby faded, not because her situation had improved, but because misery loses its shock value when it becomes routine. From the bits and pieces I gathered, she was still in that house, alone. The whispers of her separation were no longer just speculation, they were fact. Andrew had not only left, he had moved on. And in the most telling way possible, by finding someone richer, someone more ambitious, someone who could give him what Ruby never could. I wasn't surprised. From the moment I met him, I knew Andrew was incapable of love, at least, not for anyone but himself. But what did surprise me was how quickly Ruby ended up completely alone. She had no friends to turn to, because the people she thought were her closest friends were just acquaintances, people who were around when there were parties, fancy dinners, and celebrations. But when the invitations stopped, so did their presence. She had no family to rely on, because she had chosen to cut off the one person who had always been there for her. And after all this time, after everything that had happened, after months of silence, one day my phone rang. Ruby's name lit up the screen. My phone rang. Ruby's name glowed on the screen, a ghost from the past refusing to fade. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail, just like all the opportunities she had wasted. But curiosity won. Her voice was different. Gone was the arrogance. She sounded tired, as if the weight of her choices had finally crushed her. No fake pleasantries, no attempts to smooth things over. Just a simple request. She needed to see me. To talk. Maybe once I would have seen this as a chance to rebuild. But I wasn't just any father, not after everything. So, with an icy calm, I asked, "What do you really want?" Silence. Then, a heavy sigh before the truth spilled out. She needed help. Money. The house, her prized symbol of independence, was drowning her in debt. She couldn't sell it, couldn't keep up with payments. And she had no one else to turn to. I listened, letting her words settle. But I felt nothing, no sympathy, no guilt, no desire to save her. Because I finally understood. She wasn't calling me. She wasn't looking for her father. She was looking for security, for a safety net. I answered with the same calmness she had once used when shutting me out of her wedding. You chose your path. I chose mine. And unfortunately, it no longer includes you. Silence. Then her voice cracked. Are you really going to abandon me? I didn't falter. I hope you find someone to help you. Because I won't. And before she could beg, before she could try to manipulate me again, I hung up. Final update, the lesson she never wanted to learn. Days passed and the weight of that last conversation faded. Not because I forgot. Not because the pain healed. But because at some point, it simply stopped mattering. Ruby's life unraveled, but it was no longer my burden to carry. The house that had once symbolized her independence became her downfall. Unable to sell it at the price she wanted, she lost nearly everything. Homeless. Broke. Stripped of the illusion of a life that was never truly hers. For a while, she searched for help, distant relatives, old friends, anyone who still felt enough pity to extend a hand. But people grow tired of carrying those who never learned to stand on their own. And Andrew, he moved on with terrifying ease as if Ruby had never existed. He married a wealthy businesswoman, one who could give him the life he had always craved. Their travels, luxury dinners, and extravagant lifestyle were plastered all over social media, a calculated message to the world, a final erasure of his past mistake. I wondered if Ruby had seen the photos, if she had felt the same burning humiliation I once did when she excluded me from her wedding without remorse. But the difference between us? When she betrayed me, I still had my life, my independence, my peace. But Ruby? She gambled everything on a single card. And when that card burned, she was left with nothing. Rumors said she had moved into a small apartment, taken a mediocre job just to survive, her life reduced to a shadow of what it once was. But eventually, even those whispers faded. Because I stopped listening. I stopped caring. Because while she was falling, I was rising. For years, I had given her everything, ensuring she never lacked a thing. And when the time came for her to prove it was all worth it, she cast me aside. Like I meant nothing. But now, after everything, I finally understood. The most ruthless revenge is not always an act of destruction. Sometimes the cruelest justice is simply letting life do its work. And life, merciless and fair, taught Ruby the lesson she never wanted to learn. As for me, I moved forward. Not with anger. Not with hatred. But with the unshakable certainty that I had finally reclaimed what had always been mine. My peace. Make sure to like and subscribe.